Ms. Benshoof is the recipient of numerous awards and honors, including the National Law Journal's 100 Most Influential Lawyers in America, the prestigious MacArthur Foundation Genius Award in recognition of her legal work, and the Gloria Steinem Women of Vision Award. We are honored to have Ms. Benshoof here today. Without further ado, Ms. Janet Benshoof.
Thank you very much. She makes me feel very old. Thank you for inviting me here today. I wonder if I can move this down and move up a little bit. Does this come off? Yes. Can everyone hear me fine? Great. The selection of today's topic, women in conflict, gender violence, and peacekeeping, could not be more timely nor more important. Countries are riveted by the power of the ideologies of tribalism, nationalism, sectarianism to fuel such extremist groups as ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and the Boko Haram. Less attention is paid to the fact that these ideologies are grounded on the subordination and the disposability of women. Women's equality in real power is critical to weakening extremist forces and critical to global peace and security. We must leverage this current global concern over the use of mass rape and abductions as instruments of terror to get real power for women, not more pity. This brings me to the question of the day. As we sit here today, the young Chibok schoolgirls, aged 12 to 18, abducted by the Boko Haram over 9 months ago, are living lives of daily terror and torture, including rape, forced marriage, forced pregnancy, forced childbearing, and sexual slavery. Why? We live in a world where a drone, so they tell me, can find and target and kill anyone, anywhere in the world. We live in a world where the NSA can intercept all electronic communications, and as I am told, do so. Why then can't we rescue the schoolgirls in Nigeria? How can nearly 300 girls disappear in the jungle? By contrast, look at the response to the disappearance of the Malaysian airline at the very same time. Immediately, a multinational effort was launched costing tens of millions of dollars. The world's most sophisticated technological advances were deployed to scour the ocean floor 3 miles down. Now, this was not a jungle. This effort continues after they've been declared officially dead. What does this say? What this example demonstrates is that there's an enormous gulf between global concern about women and the political will to do something about it. This demonstrates the gulf between hand-wringing and, if necessary, military intervention. With the risk of being simplistic, although that has never really bothered me, the failure of states to rescue the schoolgirls in Nigeria is the same reason the Security Council resolutions calling on states to end sexual violence in armed conflict and to address women's inequality at the heart of it have, after 15 years, failed. During my life, I have seen radical advances in women's equality under law and in women's political representation, which are not always the same thing, as we know in the United States. This is evidenced by the fact of today's seminar and by the women lawyers and law students in this room, and the numbers of women in the legal profession and in the judiciary. Security Council Resolution 1325 and the 6 resolutions that followed it, so when I discuss it, it really encompasses those also, were one of those historical advances councils in the world. For the first time, the most powerful entity in the world, the Security Council, addressed the deadly impact of women on women of war. However, the disconnect between all of these advances and the daily barbarism against women, including the use of rape as a weapon of war, shows how hard it is to dislodge really embedded patriarchal and legal structures. Structures which continue to have men calling for wars and men determining the terms of peace. But all is not doom and gloom, far from it. The time is really right now, and I envy all of you young lawyers and law students, to use international law as a tool for radical change. And the situation of women in armed conflict is the perfect place to begin. That is why at this point in my career I'm focused, now some people say obsessed, with enforcing the Geneva Conventions to advance the rights of women, and to secure Security Council resolutions on women, peace, and security as binding international law, to be regarded as hard law, like sanctions on North Korea. The negligible impact of the Security Council resolutions to date or to end rape doesn't mean we should condemn them to history, nor does it mean they haven't got stronger, progressively stronger. But bottom line, the resolutions have not achieved what they set out to do. Rape and war is still endemic. Impunity of states for crimes against women continues. Inequality post-conflict has stalled. These resolutions can become powerful tools making lasting changes for women and global security, but only if we think we need to call on the core competency of the Council, that is the Council's power to deal with armed conflict, in order to push states in the UN to comply with their absolute duties that pre-existed even before these resolutions, to take affirmative actions when there's armed conflict or genocide going on in the world that constitutes a breach of peace and security. Those duties existed. The resolution should be an affirmative action push. They shouldn't obscure them, which they have done. Now, I want to talk about two issues which I hope will contribute to the very rich program set forth for all of us this afternoon. First, I want to talk about the Security Council's power to stop rape and war, the advances in international humanitarian law that I find very exciting, and how the resolutions have been lost in translation but can be found, revived, and shaped to the way we want them to be. I also want to give you some wonderful examples about how the world would radically change if the resolutions were used to enforce the Geneva Conventions for women, and the Geneva Conventions were scrutinized, examined, and reframed to be absolutely non-discriminatory in every single provision as to how they impact women in conflict. Well, first of all, the Security Council. In my 3 decades, or maybe a little more even, pushing every argument possible in every venue possible to advance women's rights, it never occurred to me, except in the last 10 years, that the Security Council was such an avenue for feminist rebels. Nor until recently, and of course recently means something at my age, I'd say in 2005 or 6, did I realize the relevance and power of international humanitarian law. Nor did I take any courses on this or any form of international law in law school. As a feminist, I thought this just and bellow stuff was just for fellows, and I thought I could stay there. Now, all that has really changed. Astonishing in my lifetime, the most radical advances for women under international law but for the UN Security Council. It was the Security Council setting up the tribunals to try the war crimes in Rwanda and Yugoslavia that unleashed the forces of decisions that turned around women's rights under the Geneva Convention's rights to international criminal law, and made permanent changes in those rights, which resulted in how the International Criminal Court was ultimately framed. These tribunals recognized rape as a war crime, a crime against humanity, forms of torture. I'm sure you've all studied these in law school. Now, of course, the Supreme Court didn't wake up one day and say, oh, let's decide it's time to give some rights to women raped anymore. Far from it. This was due to the work of women. It was women pushing the media to expose the horrific use of rape as a weapon of war. Vigorous efforts by women's groups within and without the UN, and feminist lawyers writing, many of them I'm sure NYU grads, in fact I know, writing articles that really pointed out how the law could be used and should be used as a tool for women. It's important to leverage the fact that the Security Council has put addressing gross violations of international humanitarian law at the very center of its mandate under the UN Charter to avert actual threats to peace and to restore breaches of peace. This was the authority under which they passed 1325 and the other resolutions, and this is the source of their core competence, not the equality post-conflict or the gender equity in peacekeeping, but addressing and seeing that they address effectively gross violations of international humanitarian law in armed conflict. Now, the resolutions take a much-needed holistic approach by addressing situations of the women in existing armed conflicts who are suffering from gross violations of international humanitarian law, dying from rape being used as a weapon of war, genocide and other crimes. But equally they stress, which is critical, the need for equality of women post-conflict to prevent these imbalances from triggering conflicts in the first place. But this pairing of these two opposite goals, not opposite, but complementary goals, is both to be applauded, but it's also problematic. It's problematic because in implementation they've mushed the rights together, and women's special protected rights under the Geneva Conventions have virtually disappeared in the implementation phase of these resolutions. For example, in 1325, only 3 of its 14 provisions mention international humanitarian law, although because it's the Security Council, these are binding, and that's an important reference, and it gives that provision some standalone legal power. The remainder of the resolution is about rectifying inequality, including requiring gender mainstreaming in UN bodies, gender equality in peacekeeping, building and reforming national laws. Now you can see how far these are going from the core competency of the Council when you're trying to push them to do some very gutsy acts that they normally do when violations like sanctions on North Korea are breached. Subsequent to 1325, there have been much stronger calls under the resolutions, especially as the Security Council has repeatedly admitted that its resolutions have not worked. They have not worked to separate, and they've tried something else. But they haven't tried the right things, they haven't tried hard enough, and their efforts have not been matched by states and the UN really implementing what they need. Today,